you to Lucian. Again, thank you to the club and everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Bill Small, who makes really good cups, by the way. Also, just wanted to, my mother's actually here. She actually flew in last night because, as Lucian said, we had our schedule just ready to go. Everything was set, and then the president called and his team called and said, "Hey, can you be in Newport News on Friday?" And like, yes, that's the answer when the president says, "Can you do something?" I want to tell you a little bit about that. And then the president gets up there, and I'm sitting there where you can see his teleprompter. And he gets up there and speaks for over an hour. Y'all want to know what was on his teleprompter? Nothing. Nothing. No, I think part of that's because I can't imagine anyone being able to accurately teleprompt what the president is going to say. But really, it's because he just gets up there and talks to people. He just gets up there and talks about what's on his mind, what's going on. You know, the crowd will shout some things out. He'll start talking about that. But it really was a great event. Really appreciate it. For those of you who don't know me, I'll just give you a real quick bio, and then I'll be happy to answer questions. I like answering questions because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, tells me what you want to talk about instead of letting me assuming it. Two, it allows me to have an opportunity to actually answer specific questions. And not just provide prepared remarks. But my background was military. Enlisted in the Army right out of high school. I served with the 82nd Airborne Division, 25th Infantry as an 11 Bravo or an infantryman. I know we got an artillery guy in there. We give artillery a bad time until we're calling for it, and then we love those guys. But after 9/11, volunteered for Army Special Forces, better known as Green Berets, did a couple of combat tours over in Iraq, one in 2006, one in 2008. Loved being in SF, great environment, loved the people I served with. Didn't get into politics because it was my life's ambition to be in elected office. Like, again, there's days where I wake up and I think, why would anybody do this? But I do really care about kind of the direction of the way the argument's going in this country with respect to what sort of a country we are, what sort of a country we plan to be. And what I have found is the most concerning is this is the first time in my life, I mean, it subtly started, I would say, a little earlier than this, but first time in my life where it's been very, very apparent that there's actually a significant portion of the population that wants to take the country in a direction that I think is completely antithetical to the American experiment. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what political party you are, regardless of where you fall on some of those ideological boundaries, when you start talking about socialism, when you start talking about central planning of the economy, and when you start talking about the erosion of property rights, of Second Amendment rights, I'm sorry, America is not just a place, it's not just a piece of geography, it really is a core set of ideas. And individual liberty, private property rights, self-determination, the idea that no matter who you are, no matter where you were born, who your parents were, you have a right to live your life the way you want, provided you don't infringe on the rights of somebody else. These are core fundamentals of what America is, and if you lose that, or I should say, if you decide to trade that for the promise that if you just give the government more power, more taxing authority, more regulatory authority, they're going to take care of you. When we say we will cease to be what America is, that is a true statement. That's not hyperbolic. That's not overstating the case. That really is fundamental to, I think, who we are as a people. And I've been all over the world, and the military has sent me to a lot of places that are on nobody's bucket list. But what I've noticed is they never sent me to a faraway land because they had too much freedom. But I did go to a lot of places that had too much government. So that's why I'm doing this. It's I don't get my identity from being in elected office. Don't get me wrong. It's an honor to serve in the House of Delegates. It's an honor to serve in the seat that represents James Madison's district. But I get my identity first and foremost through my faith. I get it through being a husband to my wife Tina, a father to my kids Lily, Luke, and Allie, from being a veteran. This is an honor, it's a responsibility, but it is not where I get my identity from. And so the things that I tell you that I believe when I'm talking about free markets, Second Amendment rights, property rights, right to life, these are not just statements I make. It's what drove me into this field in the first place, and for the last 5 years in the General Assembly. I have some constituents that like me a lot. I have some constituents that don't like me at all. but nobody is ever confused about my votes. Everyone knows that I'm going to vote exactly the way I tell you. So I'll leave it there because, again, like I said, I'd love to take some questions from you. So anybody got? Yes, sir.
I don't have a suggestion, a question. I got a little suggestion.
Yeah.
About the wall. If you can relay this to higher up. I have a problem. I have a solution for that. Very simple.
Yeah.
If you can convince the Democrats that the majority of those immigrants coming in will vote Republican.
Oh, yeah.
Put the wall there.
No, they pay for it. Yeah. No, that seems to be kind of a common theme on some. I was asked once. I'm like, why is it that so many politicians don't seem to want to do anything about voter fraud? I said, well, they benefit from it. And that's one of the things when I'm talking to students, when I talk to civics classes. One of the primary things I tell students is, whenever you're listening to a politician talk about a piece of legislation, spend about 5 seconds listening to their intentions, and then spend about an hour considering the incentive structure that's going to be created. Because the incentives tell you, or the intentions tell you what the politician hopes will happen. The incentive structures tell you what will happen. And unfortunately, we have a lot of, I would say there's a lot of people in politics that regardless of what they say, they benefit more from the problem than they do the solution. And anybody that benefits politically from the problem more than the solution is someone that has no intention of ever solving the problem.
Amen. One more thing.
Yes, sir.
McLean, I don't want to ever hear you say your friends across the aisle, because that means you agree with them to be their friends.
Oh. Well, I will, look, I'll say this much. So one of my favorite theologians was a guy named Ravi Zacharias. Oh yeah, I love it. You want to know what? Look, there's a lot of reasons to be mad at 2020, but the fact that Ravi died in 2020 just tops the list for me on why 2020 is just, not my friend. But he used to always talk about this verse. I believe it too. It said, first sanctify Christ in your heart, and always be prepared to give a response for the hope that is in you, but to do so with gentleness and respect. Now, I will admit, there are times when I have problems with the gentleness and respect part. But I always look at it this.
Respect them, just don't like them.
Well, I look at it this way. Because of my faith, I never see another human being as my enemy or irredeemable or anything like that. Right? My faith dictates that. It's not optional for me. My faith dictates that. However, the philosophy they espouse, that's what I despise. Right? I don't hate anybody. I don't hate anybody. But I hate the philosophy desperately because
I'm not
it's.
saying hate them, just don't like them. I don't think you go out and shoot them, just don't like them. Don't be their friend.
Yeah.
Why is there such a push for early voting this year? I don't ever remember that in the
Sure.
50-some years I've been voting.
Yeah.
But it's this year, and I'm just curious as to
It's-
why there is that push.
It's COVID, and now we're pushing for early voting as well because early voting already exists. And the problem is that because of everything that's going on right now, especially with the mail-in balloting, which is like Colorado, Oregon, and again, I'm sure you all know this, but just so I can say I did my due diligence, huge difference between mail-in balloting and absentee balloting. Absentee is I, as a voter, request it, come to my house, and then I will send it to you when I fill it in. Mail-in balloting is the registrar's office just says, okay, well, here's our list of voters, here's a bunch of ballots. And we know for a fact that most registrars' list of voters anywhere from 15 to 20% accurate. 15 to 20% inaccurate. And that's not because their registrars are bad people or they're not working hard. It's because people move. Like the military moved me all over the country, and I never thought, gosh, I better call the registrar, right? Like I never thought of it. So we have a lot of inaccuracy in those lists, and it just makes it ripe for fraud. And then the Democrats passed bills in Virginia this year where now they have ballot drop-off boxes. And I'm thinking to myself, you have got to be kidding me, right? And it's not like we put a bunch of rules in there on how they have to be secured and whatnot. So we're pushing early in-person voting because a lot of Republicans are very, very concerned about mail-in, but they're even concerned about absentee. And so one of the best options is to show up, anytime that you're allowed to vote in person, and you put that ballot through the machine yourself, so you can have some more confidence that your vote was recorded the way you wanted it to be.
Every county, we call them, you're allowed to go to the polls and vote.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sir, just on that theme, I would urge you to, I think for all Republicans, not just yourself, to make sure it's communicated out there to the voters. Those who've been around Virginia for a while, like myself, we think of early voting. We always had to do one of those options, like if you're going to be out of town or whatever, under penalty of perjury.
Yeah.
It's important to get the word out. That no longer applies.
Yeah.
It is no longer a requirement.
No, that is a good point. We now have no excuse absentee and early voting, which, again, I didn't have a problem with that because I don't have a problem with people that are legally allowed to vote to be able to conveniently vote. But yeah, so once, last year you would have to show up and under penalty of perjury, you'd have to say, this is the reason why I have to vote absentee. You don't need to do that anymore. So if that was ever an issue for you on not voting or early voting before, you can do that now, at your registrar's office, and there's no issue or penalty with doing so. Yes, sir.
What about the fact that some ballots are being thrown in the dumpster?
Well, and
Majority
again,
of them are going to be Republican, I'm sure.
yeah, no, it's
Because some of the absentee ballots are being marked R and D.
yeah. So, which again is not supposed to happen in a general election, right? So, there's a couple things. One, this is why a couple things are really important, because we can pass all the laws we want, but at the end of the day, there are people sitting in there counting ballots and doing this. Now, we've got some good registrars, we've got some good people to do it. I will tell you that in most of the counties I know, right, and I live in Culpeper County, about 62% Republican. We need more Republicans that are willing to go to the registrar's office and sign up to be poll workers, because again, part of keeping everyone honest is realizing that everybody's watching with respect to the handling of those ballots and the handling of that polling place on election day. And so anybody here can go to the registrar's office, you can sign up to be a poll worker, right? Or you can be a poll watcher. So if you don't want to do the full commitment of being a poll worker where you're there the whole election day or whatnot, poll watcher, you just have to get in touch with our campaign or get in touch with your local county Republican GOP committee. They can authorize you to basically, you can sit there where you can watch people coming in, having their name, filling it off, and voting. You can watch the process that's going on in there.
Can you exercise your concealed carry?
What's that?
Can you exercise your concealed carry?
I don't. That depends on the locality now because of recent laws that were passed in Virginia, which were bad. But that's one of the ways that you can go and help prevent the voter fraud. And then if you witness something, we're going to have numbers you can call on election day where we have our attorneys. The RPV has their attorneys. The Trump campaign has their attorneys. So again, we're prepared to challenge things if illegal activity is going on.
I'm talking about the mail-in.
Yeah. Well, and on the mail-in, again, there's some things you can do, there's some things you can't do. It's already illegal. If you're throwing out ballots, that's illegal, right? When we find out about it, then the next thing you need Commonwealth's attorneys that are willing to prosecute it. Because part of the problem, let's face it, Bloomberg put a ton of money into Virginia last year, not just in the state house races. He put a ton of money into Commonwealth's attorney and sheriff's races. Right, because he understands how important those roles are. Because you got a Commonwealth's attorney and you present them a good case of voter fraud and they choose not to prosecute it, right? Unless your Attorney General steps in, you think Attorney General Mark Herring wants to go out of his way to prosecute voter fraud. So part of it is making sure you have the right people in these positions and then being active within your community, your Commonwealth's attorney's office, so that they know that people are actually watching this. And part of it too is being involved with your registrar's office, because again, the laws are already on the books. You take a ballot, you throw it off, or you throw it away, and you get caught doing that. That needs to be prosecuted. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Sorry.
I can't promise to vote for you because we already have walk-in and orange. When I talk to somebody, there's an attack ad out there on autism. I know there's an answer. I don't know what it is. What
Sure.
can I say?
No, yeah, I've been attacked on it. Well, I always joke that come election year, I always find out what a horrible human being I am. So they've attacked me on, what is it? They've attacked me on, I'm against pregnant women,
Oh,
which my wife, we have 3 kids, she was devastated to hear that. And that was by the pipe fitters union. Because I always, when I think defender of pregnant women, I think the pipe fitters union. But they attacked me on that. Then I got attacked that I didn't want any coverage for pre-existing conditions, and then I got attacked on autism. All of them made me mad, and I'll explain all of them right here. The autism one especially made me mad because I have 2 cousins with autism. So that one's personal to me. And I know the struggle that my aunt and my uncle went through trying to get the right educational resources for their children, because if anybody here has a family member with autism, one of the first things they'll tell you is the educational development is critical for kids, especially early on. And they fought all the way up to the California State Supreme Court trying to be able to get their kids into the program that they needed to be able to be in. And so I carried legislation in Virginia. I carried it, and I also co-patroned it with Dave LaRock, where we were actually allowing parents of special needs kids to be able to direct their education dollars. Because we spend about an average of $9,000 to $10,000 a year per pupil on education. But unfortunately, a lot of times we take special needs kids and we just put them whatever government programs available, when there's other programs that would be far more effective. And Dave and I said, no, look, let the parents decide how those dollars are spent, because every single Democrat voted against it. Right? Then they had a bill, and it was a 99 to 1 vote. They had a bill, and what that bill did was it mandated, so the government came in and said, if you are selling health insurance, it has to cover autism up to a certain age. Now, I certainly want them to cover it up to a certain age, but the problem with the government mandate is it's unfunded. It's not as if the government came in and said, here's more resources, or here's an additional subsidy to be able to cover the additional cost. It was just the government waving a wand and saying, you must do this. And it's illegal not to do it. And if we're curious on why our premiums keep going up, or we keep losing our health insurance, is because self-serving politicians know that they're going to come off looking great by forcing a private company to provide a service that they're not currently providing. But it doesn't create one more doctor, it doesn't create one more specialist, one more nurse, one more hospital, one more clinic. It doesn't create any of that. It just causes all of our premiums to go up, and then people are now kicked off of their insurance that they can't afford, and politicians are over there patting themselves on the back. And when I took that vote, I had one of my colleagues look over and said, aren't you running for Congress? And I said, yeah, I am. But this is bad policy. You damn well know it's bad policy, and I'm not going to vote for it just so I can get a good article written about me. And then on the, real quick, I want to address the other two, because I'd hate for anyone here to think that I don't like pregnant women. That one, my mom's an OB nurse too, so she'd be furious with me. On that one, so they did an ad saying that I voted to make it to where you could fire someone for being pregnant. First of all, it is already federal law that not only can you not fire someone for becoming pregnant, you can fire them if they could potentially become pregnant, right? So like it's all covered in there. What the Democrats wanted to do this year, and it was part of a much larger package where they were just there's like 42 new ways to sue companies in Virginia, right? And so they added all this additional, language and all this additional enforcement power and all that. Look, if you fire someone because they could be pregnant because they got pregnant, it is already against the law. They added a whole bunch of new bureaucracy and new red tape in association with that. This is where it goes back to intention versus incentive structure. All right, so let's say you're a young woman, childbearing years, and you want to go apply for a job. So you go and you sit before that employer, and let's say there's 2 candidates. You got a woman candidate, and then you got a male candidate. Let's say the woman candidate's slightly more qualified. But the employer knows that if he hires the woman, there's significant more costs associated just by the fact that she's a woman. Now all of a sudden you've put the woman at a competitive disadvantage in the labor market. No pun intended, since this is about pregnant. Right? Look, I have no interest in putting women at a competitive disadvantage when they go to apply for a job. But that's exactly what they did. Now, that might not have been their intention, but that's the incentive structure they created. And again, this is one of the problems with, and unfortunately, you have too many politicians that they don't want to take a tough vote and then explain that, look, this is why this is bad policy. You're actually hurting the people that you think you're helping. And it's the same thing with pre-existing conditions. You want to know where they get off saying that I don't want support for pre-existing conditions? Because I oppose Obamacare. That's it. That's where they got that whole argument from. And I said, wait a second. We've got a Republican bill called H.R. 962 up on the Hill right now that says when Obamacare is repealed, we will have coverage for pre-existing conditions and vulnerable populations. It's already there.
Trump even said that.
But yeah, Trump said it. He said it again last night. But then there's the third step, and this is the part that nobody seems to want to talk about when it comes to healthcare. There is one way and one way only. Like even with the mandate, even with mandating insurance companies, or like that's still, it provides a stopgap. It provides a safety net, but it's still not sustainable long term. The question is what do you do long term? And there is only one way in all of economics. There's only one way. Right? When demand is high, there's only one way to increase quality and lower prices and increase accessibility all at the same time. You increase the supply. That's it. There's no other solution. If demand is high for a product or a service, you have to allow the supply to adjust in order to bring down prices at the same time that you increase quality and access. And I will tell you right now, the number one thing standing in the way of more supply of doctors, nurses, clinics, hospitals, it is government regulation and taxes. It is government regulation and taxes. So that's the part where I would say, yes, we need to get rid of Obamacare. Yes, you need to have that stopgap in place to make sure that vulnerable populations don't lose all coverage or lose all access to care in the interim. But my gosh, if we don't start moving toward a long-term sustainable solution, then we're going to continually be in this problem. And the way I know that the solution I'm talking about works is because if you look at the areas within medical care that are the least interfered with by government, elective surgeries, Lasik Eye Surgeries, that's where you see the difference. Lasik eye surgery 10 years ago would have cost you $2,500 per eye, and it was harder to find. Today, you can get it $500 per eye, and you can find it anywhere. Why? Because the government forgot, apparently by accident, to get involved and regulate the living hell out of the Lasik eye surgery field. And so more people said, my gosh, there's a huge demand for Lasik eye surgery. I'm going to go into that field because I'll be able to feed my family if I have that skill set. And so you saw an increase in the supply in order to meet the demand. And there's no reason why we can't have an increase in the supply in other areas within the healthcare industry, except for the fact that there are so many government regulations when it comes to insurance companies having a great deal of power over what your care looks like, when it comes to pharmaceutical companies, the biggest pharmaceutical companies not having to actually compete in an open market because of regulation. When it comes to things like somebody wanting to move into a rural neighborhood, a rural area, and provide an additional medical service, they first have to go through a whole bunch of COPN regulations, right? So any number of things where we can, and President Trump's already improved on this with like telemedicine across state lines. I think it's amazing that Democrats actually came out and removed a lot of the regulations. They suspended a lot of the regulations we have on the books during COVID. Like, oh, so you're admitting that it's not a good idea. Or you're admitting that you're artificially restricting the supply. How about you just stop doing that? All right, I can take two more. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your consistent support of the Second Amendment. I appreciate that. I think everybody here does. Also, congratulations on your Young Guns designation, one of the most important races in the country. But I was thinking about what you said about your military service. Virginia's motto, Sic Semper Tyrannis, if I don't say the Latin wrong, and your military unit's motto, Liberating the Oppressed. Do you see some significance there?
Yeah, I do. I said that last night on stage, actually, when I had a speech. I ended it with the oppressor libera. It's I love the motto of Army Special Forces. It's to free the oppressed, the oppressor libera. And I've always thought that was, I mean, we make a joke. So Special Forces, Green Berets, we operate in 12-man teams. So we always said Jesus was the first detachment commander because he had 12 disciples. And he was the ultimate liberator of the oppressed. And then Sic Semper Tyrannis, we actually had a shirt made that says, "Don't make me Sic Semper, you're Tyrannus." And I've pointed out to the governor before, I was like, you know, when your state flag has a picture of a monarch on the ground with liberty standing above him, that's our subtle way of saying don't do tyrant stuff. It was funny, I guess Prince Harry or something like that weighed in into the American election and gave his advice. It was like, you know, Prince Harry, the last time a British monarch tried to weigh into American politics, it didn't work out so well. But no, I take that, I take those mottos very seriously. I've always think there's a lot of mottos out there that are kind of, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're nice, you know, but Virginia's is special, simply because you really can't imagine the American founding without Virginia, especially Virginia. And we still have the first Thanksgiving. I don't care what those people in Massachusetts say.
I think
So,
the
yeah.
Vikings did.
I can take one more. Yes, sir.
I have a quick statement and then a question. My statement is this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last January, I was in Richmond with 25,000 other patriots toting an AR around the streets to send a message to the tyrant government. We're going to be back down there in January this year, no doubt about it, because that legislation is coming back.
Yeah, it is.
What can we do to beat that back this year and beyond?
So there's a couple of things. This is going to sound very convenient for me, but they know they went too far on guns. Now that's not to say that ideologically they think they're wrong. They did not expect over 100 localities to come up with 2A sanctuary resolutions. They sure as heck did not expect tens of thousands of people to descend on Richmond. They didn't expect any of that. And that's why some of the worst legislation, there was a lot of bad legislation that still made it through, but some of the worst ones, like the gun confiscation, and the same people crying to defund the police and talking about overcriminalization want to criminalize you for having a magazine with more than 12 rounds in it, right? And Mark Levine and I went, and Dan Helmer, holy crap, you want to talk about a guy that should know better, right? We went at it on the floor over this legislation. What you did last year was phenomenal. I work with a group called the Hazlitt Coalition, which is all a bunch of very liberty-minded state legislators all over the country. And I was sending them out that 2A resolution that we were using in Virginia, and you started to see it in Wyoming and Oklahoma and Texas. That's because we got a whole network of state legislators that are like-minded working on this issue. We also work very big on the constitutional carry bill. So doing what you did last year, that it helps, it works. There's a reason why they did not want to do it. If we have a big year in Virginia this year, two things are going to happen. We're going to be thrilled, and they're going to start to get organized again, just like they did when Trump won in 2016. Because we had some bad years in this state in 17 and 18. 19, we actually started to, fight back in some of the key areas that we needed. But it's not just your state legislative races are really important. Your attorney general race, your governor race, all of them are incredibly important. Your sheriff and Commonwealth attorneys races are more important now than they have ever been. Yep. The sheriff is a really unique law enforcement position. You go around the world, it's not like they have sheriffs. Those are kind of British Commonwealth country tradition. But the sheriff doesn't answer to the Board of Supervisors. Sheriff doesn't answer to the Commonwealth's attorney. Sheriff answers to you. Sheriff doesn't answer to the governor. I know y'all sheriff doesn't. My sheriff in Culpeper sure doesn't. Right? But when you have sheriffs that are actually willing to step up and understand their obligation to the Constitution to protect your civil liberties and your civil rights, it has a huge effect. Because it's, the legislature can pass any law they want. But and they got really mad at me when I brought this up, because I said you're going to confiscate firearms from law-abiding citizens. And he comes back with this little cheeky mark. He goes, law-abiding citizens have nothing to worry about. I said, oh, I get it. Because you've passed the law, they're no longer law-abiding citizens. I said, well, one thing I would have expected all of us to understand after the civil rights movement is just because you make something a law doesn't mean you make it just. So I guess according to your interpretation, Rosa Parks was not a law-abiding citizen. They don't like to be reminded. But thank God Rosa Parks did what she did, right? Right, and that's what they're doing right now is they're pushing people, and so much of it is ignorance about what the Second Amendment is. When I was running for re-election to the House of Delegates, my Democrat opponent, she got up there and she goes, "It says well-regulated militia. It says well-regulated militia." I said, "No, Ann. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." I said there's two components to that argument that is being made within the Second Amendment. The second argument, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, is government understanding that your right to defend yourself and to have the means to do so pre-exists government.
It's in the Bill of Rights.
It is a net. Well, but even before that, it pre-exists government. It is the founders stating that you have a God-given right to defend yourself, and therefore it is inferred, it is rationally inferred that you should have the means to be able to defend yourself. And for the government to infringe on that is to infringe on a sacred right you possess. Government, it's not a privilege, it's a right. The first part, this is the part where Democrats think, oh, but we've got our angle. Actually, it's the exact opposite of that. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. That was our founders recognizing that the only way a free country remains free is if the people, just the military, if the people have the means of defending ourselves. So they made two arguments for an individual right to own firearms. One is your inherent right to defend yourself. The second was the absolute necessity of a free state to be dependent on the people to be able to defend themselves against a foreign power.
Tell them to read the Federalist.
Yeah. But anyways, so I'm absolutely committed to the Second Amendment. I had someone ask me today, they're like, all right, Nick, I want to know where you stand on the Second Amendment. I said, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Google Nick Freitas and gun speech. Just Google Nick Freitas and gun speech. I'm not even going to tell you where I stand because I want you to watch that video because 100 million people have viewed it at this point. It's been viewed 100 million times. In part because Ted Nugent shared it. And come on, when Uncle Ted but that lays out, that for speech, that lays out my argument for why this is so important. And one of the things that I will say that we need to do, one thing we need to do as Second Amendment advocates, I think we need to understand something about the way we talk about this. We all understand the fundamental root of why the Second Amendment exists, right? It's not just for hunting, right? The founders did not put the Second Amendment in place because we were really afraid of a deer uprising, right? That was not the problem. But there's all these benefits with respect to it, and one of the things I really like to point out is, I'm a former Green Beret. Government spent a lot of money teaching me how to fight. If I'm in a dark alley, armed or unarmed, somebody's getting hurt more other than just me. Right? What about my wife? Right? What about somebody else that doesn't have the training on how to fight? The Second Amendment empowers a vulnerable person more than it does a powerful person. The whole Sam Cold thing, right? God made men big and small. Sam Cold equalized all. Right? It's the whole idea that a vulnerable person now has the ability to be able to defend themselves and does not have to be afraid. And Savannah Lundqvist, she has testified before a lot of legislators all over the country, Congress, here in Virginia. Savannah Lundqvist was a young woman that knew how to carry a firearm, had all her right permits, had been properly trained, knew how to do it. But because she wasn't allowed to carry it in a particular place, right? And this has happened to other people too, where their government has stepped in and said, you can't have it here. When you're here, you don't get to have the means to defend yourself. And she was beaten and raped. So here's my question. Who bore the consequences for that political decision? Was it the politician or was it Savannah? It was Savannah. How dare any of us tell somebody that when you go into this environment, the government has now said you're not allowed to defend yourself. Well, I think if that's the case, then is the government completely responsible for your safety and security as long as you're on that premises? I would say that they are. Should they be civilly and criminally liable as a result? I would say that they should be. You've told me I'm not allowed to defend myself in this environment. I guess you must be fitting the bill if anything happens, right? But of course they don't want to assume that responsibility. And let's never forget that these bills are almost always written by people that benefit from taxpayer subsidized security themselves. And so the one thing I would encourage us to do is while we make a comprehensive argument for the Second Amendment, we really need to focus in on that component where, they love to talk about 33,000 gun deaths in this country. The vast majority of them, over 60%, are usually suicide related. And then you have a lot are committed by less than 5% of the population, which is usually gang violence. And then they like to throw in the ones too where it's actually a police officer using a firearm. Here's what they don't like to talk about. From year to year, there is anywhere from 1 million to 2 million uses of a firearm in order to prevent a crime from taking place. And the press like to say, well, there's only 127 cases where a firearm was used to prevent a crime from taking place. All right. No. There's 127 cases where someone was shot But the good news about a firearm is when you say, don't rob my store, it tends to get the point across without even having to pull the trigger.
Just a mere presence.
So now we're talking about the mere presence of a firearm actually stops the crime. That is a victim that never was. So when we're making the argument for the Second Amendment, we're not making it on behalf of an inanimate object called a gun. We're making it on behalf of the 1 to 2 million people every year in this country that were not a victim because they had the means of defense, and they want them to be vulnerable, and we want them to be protected. So, all righty. I gotta go. Gina's Gina's my adult supervision. So, all right. Thank you all very much. If anybody has any questions for our campaign, we have James Vandenberg here. We have a website, nick4va.com. We do a town hall. Abigail doesn't want to debate us, so we got to do town halls. I like doing them, but we do a town hall Facebook Live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. You ever want to ask me a question? We do them right there, and then we keep them all up on Facebook. We don't bury them away. We don't do teletown halls where we get to screen all the questions and you don't know who's asking what. We make it all very, very public. We also have a podcast where we talk about specific issues. We talk about the importance of sheriffs. We talk about the Second Amendment. We had Eric Pratt from Gun Owners of America on there talking about the Second Amendment, what we can do to protect our rights. So that's all there. Please share that. And the reason why I say is because we do have a lot of attack ads coming against us. She keeps attacking me on healthcare. I said, well, Abigail, let's make this simple. Let's have a debate on healthcare. You want to tell everybody I'm so bad about it. Wouldn't you love to get on a debate stage and prove it? Turns out, no, she wouldn't, right? But we have that information out there, and the more you can share it with friends, social media is an easy way to do it, the more it helps. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a good night and good weekend.
Well, I thank you for making